All right, everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the daily life and culture of the Islamic world during the what we would call basically the medieval period. All right, so beginning, we're going to take a look at what family life was like. All right, so they the early Islamic people would stress equality amongst all believers, but women's social standings was typically very low. They were subservient to all men in their family. So a mother would be subservient to their son. All right. And for those of you who are not sure what subservient means, they're at the beck and call of all the males in their family. They almost servant like, I guess you could say. Now, social standings and positions of women did kind of improve through like being able to own some property and the polygamy laws. And for those of you who don't know what polygamy is when somebody can have more than one spouse. So, Muslim men in some of these countries at this time, if they could afford to support more than one wife, they were allowed to have more than one wife, which, at least from the wife's perspective, you could see it as making their lives easier because there's more hands to help out around the house. Still kind of, by our Western standards, that's a little, not really sure, right? All right, now, Muslim men, they, of course, participated in the politics. They were the soldiers. They also were the business owners and the merchants. They were the guys working in the fields. They took care of basically everything else. Now, for city and country, there's a lot of rural living going on. There's a lot of deserts and a lot of spacing between towns and cities. So a lot of people just lived out in the countryside like you would see in a number of countries around the world at this time. Now, like most cities, Muslim cities would begin as places where people would trade their goods, and also as like buildings would come up around forts or castles or something along those lines. Like a blacksmith might show up and work at a military fort, and his family would be there with him because he's working for this military outpost. And eventually more and more people start living in and around because they're doing business with the military, and eventually a town starts to grow around it. All right, now Muslim merchants, they would dominate trade in the Middle East and across North Africa until the 1400s. And remember, these guys are basically getting their start in the 600s, late 500s, early 600s. So for the next 750 years, they are the dominant businessmen in the Middle East and North Africa. All right. Now, growing food was difficult because of the dry climate, and there's not a whole lot of water sources. So we get some landowners, like guys who have like these big plantations almost, and they would get government assistance to try and get stuff growing and all that. They would develop these irrigation methods in places like Spain, and it's how they're able to cultivate and get crops really going so they can send them throughout their territories. Okay? So moving on. Their trade. The Muslim countries or states, they became very wealthy due to trade. They had a huge amount of control in Mediterranean trade. They were able to trade between North Africa and Europe, and they were able to trade between Asia and Europe in that way as well. The Indian Ocean, they had a pretty decent influence there too, where they would get involved with the African, Indian, and Chinese trade. And they would also utilize that ancient trade route, the Silk Road, that goes from China all the way to Europe. They control, if you look in the center of that map, where Arabia is, and this is like Iraq and Iran today, this is a big chunk of the Silk Road, and they controlled it. So yeah, they're getting a piece of the action there. All right. Now, achievements that the Islamic world had, right? Besides trade, they were also very big in the spread and communication of knowledge between peoples in the Islamic states. Now, mathematicians, we can thank them for a couple of things. They developed the place value system, in which a number's value is determined by the position of its digits. They invented algebra. So those of you taking algebra or trig, you can thank the Islamic world for that. Now, they would also be describing solar eclipses and prove that the moon affects the oceans, and they would further advance ways of getting the positions of stars. And they were able to actually calculate and measure the circumference of the Earth and produce some of the most accurate maps of the Eastern Hemisphere at that time because of all their mathematical know-how. All right. They would also get classification systems developed for animals, minerals, and vegetation. It's pretty big right there because they would have basically a manual of these things so that if you weren't sure what something was, you could look it up and it'll tell you exactly what it was. Same thing with doctors with medical procedures and, like what's this piece of the body? What does it do? Things like that. All right. Now, calligraphy is something that the Muslim world developed. It is a very decorative, stylized form of handwriting. And you don't see a lot of pictures in Muslim architecture and artwork. It's usually incorporating elements of calligraphy as well as geometric shapes. All right. Mosques. This is their church or their temple. This is the Muslim place of worship. Now, the traditional ones of the old world, they're very stylized. They have the domes, they have the minarets, the towers, all that type of stuff. Like, I don't want to say your stereotypical Middle Eastern building, but that's at least to help you get an idea of what they looked like. All right. Now, art. I said they weren't really pictures, but they did do mosaics. These are these geometric designs that are very pattern oriented because they didn't really depict people very much, especially Muhammad, because they didn't want to have icons like that people would end up worshiping instead of Allah. All right, Dome of the Rock, we talked about it a little bit last time. Now it's a site of Muhammad's ascension into heaven. It is also believed in the Judeo-Christian world as well as the Muslim world that this may have been the place where Abraham had attempted to sacrifice his son Isaac to show his devotion to God. And if you read into like Book of Revelations and all that in the Judeo-Christian world, it is supposedly a site where the Antichrist is going to try and rebuild the Temple of Solomon and gain power. All right, so after some time, there's going to be some divide in power control of the Muslim empires. So we're going to get this major division. The biggest one is going to be the Ottoman Empire. We are going to be focusing a lot more on them this coming semester with like huge influence they have on the Western world and in Europe. Next, then we have the Safavids. We briefly talk about them. And we're going to get the Mughal Empire that comes in, takes over a vast chunk of India. All right, so that's a little bit of what's to come. But that is going to do it for us today. So we will continue next time.